to have your company as always, and a wave and a shout out to everybody watching as well on Facebook Live and YouTube. And thank you for the comments and thumbs up and everything else that you're leaving here on our social media. Do please like, do share, do follow, do subscribe, and help us build a little stronger platform all the while on the social media front. It just helps us to reach out a little bit more to this continent that is waiting to be conquered for Christ. Lovely to have this time and this space with you on social media as well as on the radio. Thanks very much indeed earlier to Anne and Tony Shields, who joined us, great supporters of Radio Maria, involved in Retrouvailles, Rediscover in English, and we'll play back that little segment for you again as a new guest interview. And we do hope, chatting with them afterwards, that we can feature other couples who have made the same journey through Retrouvailles, rediscovering the original life and love, if you like, that entered in at their married relationship and deepening their relationship one with another. We were speaking about one or two of the couples that we had known and whose stories we had heard shared before. Most extraordinary journeys that couples have made. One couple in particular who were pretty much on their way the next day to the divorce court, and had for years there was rancor and bitterness and division and living separate lives altogether. And in one last moment of grace said, well, look, let's give Retrouvailles a chance, an opportunity. And so they did, and they began what was quite a journey for them to rediscover again through this empathetic listening to one another, kind of discovering listening skills, put everything aside, listen attentively with the heart, not just with the ears, to one spouse, and begin a gentle process of conversation. Not ignoring or sort of squelching all the hurt necessarily, but not letting the hurt dominate or control the relationship. This is where mercy begins to enter in. That's what the Lord is speaking about. Take the plank out of your own eye first, rather than the splinter out of your brother's eye or your spouse's eye. That's got to be a tough journey, but it's the best and in a way sometimes the only way is mercy. And you might say, well, how is that possible if I've been so grievously wounded or betrayed in my relationship? Well, however did the Good Friday Agreement come about? Just flicking through the Irish Catholic there, I see a picture of John Hume with his wife celebrating the Good Friday Agreement. How did that peace process begin? And it's still very fragile, as we know, even to this day. So how does that continue, except that there is this some form of empathetic listening or sympathy one to the other in relation to try to grow in and deepen one's understanding of the other person. When the Pope speaks about dialogue, this is what he has in mind, I'm quite sure, that dialogue with other religions. Some would criticize and accuse the Pope of syncretism or watering down the faith when he has these gatherings, or he goes to a synagogue, or he goes to a Muslim, to a mosque, when he meets with these world religious leaders, when in fact I'm sure what he has in mind is at some first steps of dialogue, of finding a little bit of commonality, of listening to what the other has to say, and then carving out a space where he may also be heard, and that the truth of Christ may prevail. And what happens in that instance is not that it's ever about scoring points. Remember, I always say that quite often of Frank Duff from the Legion. It's not about winning arguments. It can't be about winning arguments, even if you are right, and even if you do win. If it becomes about winning arguments, then it becomes a trip in egoism, the self, that I'm right and the rest of you are wrong. How can that be the case? How can that... And I've had emails from various people and letters and so on, convinced they're right, whatever denomination, whatever faith or belief path they're on, convinced, well, this is the way and there is no other. It's not to say that all roads lead to the same. That's not true. That's syncretism again, this idea of it doesn't matter what road you're on, we'll all get there. That's wrong, patently wrong, because all roads, in practice, don't lead to the same destination. Our task is a little different. It's about initiating the conversation, again, this empathetic listening and winning the right to speak. Frank has some very good tips in the Legion of Mary handbook as well when it comes to visiting homes, and years of experience, of course, with the Legion of Mary and visiting. And one of the simple tips, very practical, calling to a house, is that, again, he says to go cap in hand. This idea of not standing up on a podium or on a platform or taking the high ground and winning the argument. I mean, in theory, sure, we can win the argument, but that's not at all what it's about. Jesus didn't come to win arguments; he came to win souls. And so Frank's advice visiting doors is very simple again. It's with that idea of cap in hand, but of winning the right to speak is one of his ideas too. Not that we come and it's just this big outpouring of a spiel of here's why we're here and you have to listen to this and I've come to tell you and I've come to set you free. That will close the door straight away. That will put up the wall. People's eyes will glaze over. I don't think anybody, it's human nature, we don't like to be told what to do or advised without seeking. If we go and seek advice, that's different. But we're not that very fond of being dictated to. That's human nature. So it's the very opposite then in making that approach to souls. And this holds good not just for Legion work and evangelization in general, but all kinds of relationships, and especially when you're trying to reach out and touch another soul and bring them with you a little bit on the faith journey. That if we get up on that soapbox, if we stand up on a height, if we try to take that high moral ground and convince by way of argument, and there's a place for that too, and there's a time for that. I think that it's good to, if in the right circumstances, but more often than not, it's simply making a gentle approach, an invitational one, a way of simply making a point by how we live and what we say and what we do, more than just being convincing at the time. And maybe we've learned from Retrovi too that in building and rediscovering a marriage relationship between husband and wife, this idea of listening with the heart, of really hearing the other person and allowing them to speak and seeking to understand their emotions, their motivations, how it is they're feeling with what they're saying. And I wonder, is that a bit more difficult for men to do than for women? But I can imagine it being a very freeing thing at the same time, that we stop, we allow ourselves to stop and say, look, it's not always about me here. This isn't about you. It's something deeper at work. So in the work of evangelization, I would say it's the very same, that, at the doorstep, let's say, or at the contact, we're on the street, that we simply make our invitation and then allow the other person to speak to and encourage them maybe even to make their feelings felt or their understanding known, and that we seek to try to understand where they are coming from and empathize with where they and I think that's a way then of making a friend. That's a way of building a little trust, just a smidgen of trust. And you see, on that foundation then can be built and make room for further dialogue. And I'm quite certain that's what the Pope has in mind, again, when he's meeting Jewish rabbis or Muslim imams or Hindu, whoever, that he's building a little trust, just a small step in a relationship, and ultimately stepping back and pointing the way to Christ. Frank Duff sought to do that. I see that in the Irish Catholic has been published this week. Some lovely pictures there. I can see myself in there as well, the Legion Centenary and so on. It's a lovely celebration, but Pope, just on the front page, rather, Archbishop Dermot, speaking in those terms in relation to Frank Duff, that he was ahead of his contemporaries in calling every Christian to the apostolic dimension of our faith, and like a John the Baptist in his own way, seeking to carry that faith to others, and to do so courageously, I suppose, but at the same time uncompromisingly, but very gently. And we see how Frank reached out to the poorest in the city here in Dublin, and it was on account of that credibility, if you like, that he wrought for the Legion of Mary through that work, would certainly make him a voice worth listening to, and a force indeed of grace to be reckoned with likewise. Pope Francis, again, you might say on the same, again he's criticised for this, and it's a bit mysterious, wait and see, hold on. Like, he has such a great ministry to the poor. He reaches out to those in prison, he makes a point of visiting the sick. And that makes anything he then has to say surely worth listening to or being attentive to. And then if it is that, again, he's finding this common ground, care for the environment, care for our common home, is he not seeking to do the very same? And that other religions, non-believers altogether, would say, well, here's a world leader who has something to say. And what is the Pope seeking to do but to point us back to Christ? Again, not everybody, there'll be those who, on one wing or the other wing, will find fault one way or the other. Isn't it amazing? Whereas if we can cultivate, again, as Tony and Anne were speaking of, this listening with the heart. And when you meet these couples, I hope you've had that experience of meeting couples who've been through, say, marriage encounter or something like Retrouvaille, and that they have rediscovered their relationship. There's a kind of unspoken, I'm slow to use the word magic, there's an unspoken atmosphere, a link, a kind of electricity. It's the kind of electricity, emotionally charged, I suppose, that you see in a couple who are going out with one another. It's the way they look at each other, the way they are deferential towards one another. It's the way they kind of have a little extra respect for each other. And it changes them, and it can't but influence those around them to the good in the same way. So there's a lot to be said for working hard at that kind of relationship. That, to me, that's the taking out of the plank. Get rid of my own ego, purging really my own selfishnesses, so that I can be more selfless. And that radiates its own form of goodness. And if it is that I'm meeting resistance, just blockage from my spouse, or blockage from my family, or resistance from others, that's this kind of radiating of the good of others cannot but melt hearts. It cannot but, like the centurion at the foot of the cross, it just finally dawned on him, here he was putting the Lord to death. Surely this was the Son of God. He just overwhelmed by the words of Christ from the cross, the presence of Our Lady and the good women. Again, there was no anger there. There was none. And in those horrible circumstances, he was an innocent man. And even the centurion, who would have been hardened to cruelty and death, his heart touched and moved. I wonder what ever became of him. I'm sure he probably went off and became quite the mystic afterwards. Maybe a Pauline conversion. Don't know. Interesting thought. But that's the journey that each one of us is likewise on, and that's what the gospel certainly teaches us today. And just nice, a timely moment really to have Anne and Tony and sharing as well. St. Peter Claver is our saint. He hardly got a look in. 1654 was the year he died, 17th century saint, and a Jesuit of the same order, of course, St. Ignatius, as Pope Francis too. An apostle to, it says here, the Negroes. I'm not sure if that word is used as much nowadays. It's certainly not meant in any offensive way, but to the coloured community, or people of the coloured race. What's the politically correct expression now? He was born at Catalonia, was educated at Barcelona University, became a Jesuit in the year 1600 at Tarragona. He was sent to the College of Palma in Mallorca, where he met Alfonso Rodriguez, was a saint as well, who encouraged his desire for missionary work in the New World. And he studied theology then in Barcelona, was sent to Cartagena, maybe is a better pronunciation now, in Colombia in 1610, where he was ordained priest 5 years later. So Latin America, his field of, at least initially certainly, of his work. At this time, Cartagena was one of the principal centres of the flourishing but iniquitous slave trade in Africans from Angola and elsewhere in Western Africa, who were shipped in large numbers and often unspeakable conditions across the Atlantic. There was a movie some time ago which depicted that. I remember just the graphic images, that awful ill treatment of slaves on those ships. It was all money driven, nothing of the humanity of those persons. Terrible. So St. Peter obviously deeply affected by that. So Cartagena was a convenient clearinghouse. It's been estimated that 10,000 slaves reached it every year. Peter devoted himself to them under Father Alfonso de Sandoval, who had already spent 40 years looking after them. Peter both imitated and surpassed the achievements of his predecessor. When a slave ship arrived in the port, the slaves were shut up in yards, herded together in the heat, without care or medical attention of any kind. Peter would visit them with medicine and food, with brandy, lemons and tobacco. His band of helpers assisted in this distribution and acted as interpreters. Maybe he had some former slaves helping him too. With their help and with the use of pictures, he would teach the principal truths of Christianity and prepare them for baptism. Lovely, isn't it? He also inspired them with some idea of their dignity and worth as men who were redeemed, in contrast with their appalling state of present misery. So giving them some, at least through faith and through the love and attention that he and his companions were giving to them, some little ray of hope of humanity, that not everyone in Colombia was a slave trader. There were some who respected them. Eventually the slaves were sent to the mines, where the work was too hard for the native Indians. Gosh. And to the plantations, of course, cotton picking, which he visited every spring. I suppose coffee plantations too, which he visited every spring, and not always with the approval of their masters. So he just arrived, didn't ask for permission. He would also nurse the slaves in conditions which nobody else could endure. He used to call himself the slave of the slaves, or it says here the slave of the Negroes forever. Isn't that lovely? I mean, it's washing the disciples' feet. There's a way of empathizing with others. There's a way of taking the log out of our own eyes. I often wonder, and I've often advised this, and I'm sure you've heard me say it, how good it is to volunteer to help others who are poor or weak or less well off, to do something by way of an outreach. It's very healing for the ego and very healing for ourselves, and there's something that is very fulfilling and relates to our dignity as well. This, however, did not prevent St. Peter from caring also for the souls of the more well-to-do members of society, and for the traders and visitors, including Muslims and English Protestants too. And this is all in Cartagena, or Cartagena, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, or indeed for the condemned criminals, many of whom he prepared for death. He was also a frequent visitor to the city's hospitals, and his apostolate included an annual mission to traders and to the men of the sea in the port every autumn. Busy man, this St. Peter Claver. Miracles, prophecies, the gift of reading hearts, and the practice of severe personal penance were all ascribed to him. It seems to be a standard for the saints, that they were quite mortified in themselves, and it must have helped them in their work to do what they had to do in very difficult circumstances. In 1650 he was taken ill while preaching to the slaves, and although he recovered, he suffered from paralysis for the remaining 4 years of his life. Broken in health, neglected by the young man who was responsible for looking after him, and able to leave his cell only for short visits to the hospital or to friends. He lived long enough to welcome his successor in his apostolate. At his death, the civil authorities and the clergy, who had thought him indiscreet or misguided. Again, isn't it interesting how your good work can be so easily misunderstood and criticised? Instead, then, at his death, they united in his praise. He was given a civic funeral, while Africans and Indians arranged for a mass of their own. He was canonized in 1888 and declared patron of all missionary enterprises among the African enslaves, and feast day 9th of September. So a very strong following of him in the US and in Latin America. Not as much known, I don't think, here in Ireland, but it is a remarkable story. You know, going out to the slave ships, and not always welcome by the slave traders, but going out to them to minister to those who are less well off and in need. So there's a standard to put before us today. These saints live such extraordinary lives and with such generosity of heart and of spirit. Now, we don't have to look very far for slavery in our world today, and I don't mean the kind of slavery that St. Peter Claver was confronted with, but a sort of slavery to sin, slavery to vice, to drink, to drugs, to pornography, slavery to lives of self-destructive behaviour and selfishness and greed, and of the self, again the ego, and those who have drifted far away from faith. They become slaves to, I don't know, the video gaming culture is a kind of a slave trade of sorts too. It enslaves people. It's kind of frightening the way these virtual reality things. That's a conversation for another day. I put one on once and it was like, I'm not too comfortable in this environment. There's a strange kind of experience. And you know, if people are getting, and someone was chatting with me yesterday, how all this technology heading for faster processing speeds and all these things is a way of enabling more of this culture of gaming and immersion into a virtual world. There's a kind of a slavery to that, because it disconnects us from the real world and the reality of the person next to us or in front of us, and the needs of the poor around us. And such people indeed could be constituted as modern day slaves of a sort, and maybe worse off in some respects, because maybe many don't realise the slavery they're under and the sort of addictive behaviour that they're under. I mean, just look at, again, I'm guilty of it myself, so how many people immersing their heads in their mobile phones and not looking up at the person next to them. Is that a form of today's kind of slavery? And there's a kind of an addictive pattern to the whole thing, and it's so difficult to free ourselves of it. I find myself bringing this up in confession. It's a shocking waste of time. It can be. Now, a very useful tool, and it's good for us here at Radio Maria in its own way. But are we mindful then indeed to look up from these things and to see the person next to us, to see the person in need, to not be, again, lost in a world that disconnects us from the stark reality of suffering that may well be around us. Challenging for us all, and one for the examination of conscience, one to test us out. So thanks to Roisin, she dropped in a copy of the Irish Catholic here, and it was nice to meet the lads from the Irish Catholic, our own Ruan Jones, of course, who comes on here. He's been on with us for quite a while with his show on a Friday evening there, Thursday evening, sorry, it is, for the movie show with his brother Senan as well. And Ruan was there, a picture of him there, fine young man, at the centenary for the celebration of the Legion there last Friday. Love to see those pictures, nicely taken as well. And next to it there, and congratulations and best wishes to the new Bishop of Ferns. So Ger Nash is being ordained a bishop. It's nice to see the other bishops there, and the nuncio in that photograph laying hands on him. And we pray every grace and blessing for him. We're off down to Ferns, of course, tomorrow. Please God, down to the town of Wexford and the parish of Wexford Town, the two churches there. And we hope we can meet you there and greet you and share with you. We'd love to meet you. And we are hoping they just open a little door there into the Diocese of Ferns. And again, we must arrange to meet with Bishop Ger and ask him to come on air. It'd be lovely to chat with us as a brand new bishop and share with us indeed his aspirations for the Diocese of Ferns. And like that, we were speaking yesterday with the Bishop of Conry, and again opening ourselves up as a radio at the service of the Church, and to build up and encourage and to strengthen all those indeed working on the ground, so to speak, as the air support. So some lovely pictures there and some nice news in this week's Irish Catholic newspaper there as well. And nice to see. They have always been, I must say, the Irish Catholic, very strong supporters of the Legion of Mary, and very encouraging indeed to the great work the Legion does. And I think partly actually because there's a reciprocal relationship there too, in that many Leitries have for a long time since been promoters of the Irish Catholic newspaper in the same way. So interesting there. Good, let's pause for a little piece of music if we may, and this is a birthday request, a request that's going out here as well. So for Grace Marie on her 11th birthday, and I see there Joseph and Michael, they're praying that Mayo will beat Tyrone tomorrow. We dare not pray that. We pray that the best team may win. But being from Mayo, you're perfectly entitled to do that. Does raise the question in heaven, how does sport work in heaven? Does the one side let the other side win? And how does that work then if there's no competition? I don't know. So, anyways, I'm not sure. Are we playing the green and red of Mayo? Are we seriously playing that? We are? Okay. We're going to get into big trouble for doing that now. I don't know if that's such a good idea. A happy birthday as well to Miriam McDermott. So well done on her 18th birthday. Lovely to play a few. So thanks, Christine, watching on Facebook, and Elizabeth and Eileen and Margaret too. Great to have your company on our social media. So I'm not sure if we should go there with this piece of music, but we'll risk it, and we'll do it a little bit tongue-in-cheek, kind of a Ceol agus crack moment, without wishing to cause offence to anyone in particular or to show bias in any particular direction. But because Grace Marie is 11 years of age, and because she's from Mayo, we'll take a chance just this once. So thanks, Andrew. We'll be back after this piece of music. Yeah, we're just sorry about that. It seems to be a technical hitch there. It was all maybe it's a sign. Sometimes these things can be a sign. So somebody sent me in a sign here. Actually, speaking of signs, it's one of these outside your church signs. It says, "When people bring up your past, tell them Jesus has dropped the chargers." I love those. I used to use those in school. They're kind of these big notice boards. I don't know if you've seen them outside churches, where you can like, Jesus is the reason for the season. Do you know that idea? Or 7 days without prayer makes 1 week. WEAK. I love those little catchy signs. That they're clever ideas. So I think Andrew's still grappling with that Mayo song. I wonder if we have to abandon it. Isn't this I'll tell you, that might well be. So apologies for that, for all whose birthday we had intended celebrating there as well. Sarah. So we'll see. I think something's coming through my headphones there, which you might well be hearing on the camera as well. But don't worry, Janine is in touch as well. She says, God bless you, Father. Thanks for always helping us to be better people. Well, that's a journey we're on together, Janine. And again, if you have any little thoughts or insights, something that strikes you, maybe a God incident on your journey, why not share it with us there on Facebook? Drop the comment in there, and thanks, Christine, for your comment too as well. I think we are somewhere closer to a piece of music now. We're going to chance it, but I think that's a sign for us there. We've been given a little sign. So enjoy this, and we'll be back shortly.
green and red Mayo.
Very beautiful piece with the skill level now, and just listening to that, each of the notes there. La Source, Isabel Perrin Hesselman is the name I've given here. Thanks, Andrew. Apologies that our little tribute to Mayo didn't come to pass. It's just a technical thing. These things happen. David just texted and he said maybe John Carlin got into the studio there and put a spanner in the works and wouldn't let it be played. John, of course, is a big Tyrone supporter. So God bless Tyrone and Mayo tomorrow. May the best team win. And I'm glad we don't enter into those controversies, radio. I can see we're walking ourselves into a bit of trouble if we start going down the sport route there a little bit too much. At any rate, a happy birthday indeed to our two birthday girls, Grace Marie on your 11th birthday and Miriam on her 18th birthday today as well. Thanks, Susan is watching in there on Facebook too. Shout out to you. And the harpist who is playing actually on the centenary there is that Siobhan Flynn. Beautiful music that was at Legion Centenary. I mentioned that before. The harp, such an incredible instrument, just beautiful. So again, I suppose it's not surprising that it would be depicted as the heavenly instrument to play. You know, we played on our harps. By the rivers of Babylon, we hung up our harps. You know, they stopped playing their harps anymore. So they say there's a different instrument for hell, but we better not go there. We'll leave that one aside. So I'm not sure if not too many people would be looking forward to playing a harp, but you never know. In heaven, we might give another instrument of choice instead. We'll certainly be singing the Lord's praises, that's for sure. Now can I dip into our do-cat once again, this lovely question and answer catechism, because this is a Chatechesis, of course, and it's meant indeed that we grow a little bit and stretch a little bit in our faith. And I'm just reading the few paragraphs that are in this in relation to safeguarding creation. And we've learned that, look, this isn't an eco-warrior sort of approach to things, or, you know, something that's solely concerned with saving endangered planets, endangered animals and plants, which is very good. Again, I'm not criticizing that in any way, but that there's a kind of broader, deeper sense in what motivates us in that regard. Where can we find what the Church has to say about environmental ethics? Well, the Church's central text on ecology is Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si, 2015. Gosh, I didn't think it was that far away. I thought it was more recent than that. It offers a comprehensive analysis of the ecological threat with reference to many scientific studies, and it describes the causes of the crisis. These consist not only in the striking political impotence as the subject of politics to technology and a subjection of politics to technology and finance. Interesting. That's an interesting thought, isn't it? That political impotence, that they really are under the cosh a little bit, under the thumb, under the pressure of technology and finance, and it makes somehow political action a little more sterile. This kind of influence across, that's very interesting. And the mindless economic exploitation of the earth which results. Wow, that's a strong statement. It's a mindless exploitation. It seems to be the case, the stripping of Amazonian forests, for instance. You hear about this mindless destruction, when it is that these great forests they're the breathing force. They provide the oxygen we need to breathe. They're so vast, and the core reason for the problem is to be sought in man himself, the human person, in a general disturbance of his relationship with creation, my relationship with my own self, with others, with God, and with the earth. Again, that should knock us all back and just have us careering a little bit, thinking, my own brokenness, my own sinfulness, my own, again, back to the egotism and selfishness, that is the greatest threat of all, in a way. And yet, at the same time, does that mean we should get rid of people? That there is a line of thinking that suggests that, if you have less people in the world, well, you'll save the... I have to press pause on that one. Hold on a second now. There's more to that conversation. Conversion restores man, who has to learn that everything is interconnected and that genuine care for our own lives and our relationships with nature is inseparable from fraternity, justice, and faithfulness to others. Okay, and again, I'm keeping our conversation at that strongly at that level too. It's not care for the environment for the environment's sake, but rather out of a spirit of fraternity. It's care for the other. It's respect for God and His gift that is the motivating force, not just the saving of endangered plants and animals, a good thing in itself, but again, not for its own sake. So genuine ecology is at the same time protection of the environment, human ecology, social ecology, and cultural ecology. Human freedom, says Pope Francis, can limit and direct technology. Let me get that right. Yeah, can limit and direct technology. We can put it, turn the page, sorry, put it at the service of another type of progress, one which is healthier, more human, more social, more integral. Amen to that. So I think now we're on the right track. Now we're seeing the purpose behind environmentalism. So in addition to Laudato Si, the encyclical's Popularium Progressio, again, that's one of the social teachings of the Church, and Pope Benedict's Caritas in Veritate, charity in truth, also or truth in charity, are also important documents for the relationship between social responsibility and ecological protection of the environment. So here's what Pope Benedict, he is so insightful. What he has to say now, this is in the margin for us. We are God's creatures. It's exactly the starting point, really, always. Made in His image and likeness, endowed with an inviolable dignity, and called to eternal life. So there's your bedrock. There's your first rung of the ladder. Wherever man is diminished, the world around us is also diminished. Doesn't it follow then that the destruction of the environment we're seeing around us is because we're destroying ourselves? It loses its ultimate meaning and it strays from its goal. What emerges is a culture not of life, but of death. How could this be considered progress? Pope Benedict asks. So you can have all the technological, financial, etc. progress you want, material progress, worthless if we're not at the same time, Pope John Paul was good on this too, at the same time seeing moral and spiritual progress as well to accompany it. Again, the Pope Benedict, the brutal consumption of creation begins where God is not, where matter is henceforth only material for us, where we ourselves are the ultimate demand, where the whole is merely our property and consume it for ourselves alone, where we must possess all that it is possible to possess. Grasping at it. I want, this is mine. And yet that's a slavery already. We've already begun to destroy it when we seek to possess that which isn't even ours, which is already given to us as a gift to freely use. There's some fabulous sort of deep stuff going on there. Nice deep thoughts to share. So good, let me keep it in that context for you always. Not again to labour or overburden the idea of environmentalism, which is all, as I say, a noble thing. But in the context of the light of the gospel, the context of our dignity as creatures made by God, the sanctity of our calling to eternal life, and our fellowship thereby with one another in assisting each other on that path to eternity likewise, which begins right now. I mean, it's happening right now. This is, if you want, the first day of the rest of your life. Isn't that what they say? This is eternal life has begun for us. You're listening, you're hearing, you're watching. This is eternity has started. So let's begin today to begin how we would wish to live for eternity and challenge ourselves in so many ways with that empathetic listening I was speaking of, that sense of custody of the environment for the sake of others in the light of God's goodness. And let us see all of that then from sort of that eternal perspective, that there's a higher journey at stake here all the while. Great conversation to have, and I would love to hear from you. I would like you to share with me. I would indeed like you to exchange your ideas and your thoughts with me. Please do send them in. Please do email them in. Please do text them in to us all the while. So just put away the Irish Catholic there. We'll pray our prayers as well. So listen, if you're listening back, if you're watching back, by all means, please do message, email, text, etc. 089 467 2000. Email info@radiomaria.ie and telephone 014123456. Write St. Anthony's Business Park, Ballymount Road, Dublin 22. And let us know your thoughts. Please help us to continue this conversation together. So have your breviaries handy. We're turning to week 3 of Friday for our midday prayer very shortly, and we'll pause as well for our Angelus bells. And Ashing will come back to us at 12:15 for our Your Say, and we'll have our live lunchtime rosary as always at 12:30. Ollie Clark then will share with us his lovely music show at 1 o'clock. So let's pause, and the bells will give us a brief